It's been a long time, and I know that the majority of you have heard of initiation rites or rites of passage, where one is prepared in order to represent a certain sect or religion. So in this case, I would like to talk about human ignorance, considering the fact that the majority of us have been to school and we go to churches, we watch sports, and we also follow politics. But unfortunately, I've just realized that the majority of the people who do these things are very ignorant. Let's start with schooling, for instance. The average person who's been to school has never decided to be educated. It was the decision of their parents to send their kids to school so they may have a better future, based on the fact that we live in a racist world, where everything is sold and we all have to compete for jobs in order to buy our privileges or the basic necessities in life, such as food, shelter, clothing, etc. Things that under normal circumstances or a civilized world would not have to buy. And the average person who goes to school chooses a career not based on their quest for knowledge, but as a means to earn a living. And so are the people who go to church. The average person who goes to church does not listen to what the preacher teaches and hardly knows the Bible, but attends the church for the sake of being seen as relevant or complying to the system, which requires a mature person to go to church. And they think that by doing so, they are proving themselves to be intelligent, or we can say that's simply trying to fit in. The same goes on with sports. In sports, the funny thing is that, or the most interesting part is that the average person who watches soccer on TV or everywhere else has played soccer, so they understand soccer. Unlike the people who go to church or school, who have never been teachers, or who don't even know what needs to be taught at school, etc. Let's look at the fact that, for instance, concerning education, that a country like Japan has a company called Toyota, and Toyota produces cars, which most countries buy, including South Africa. And I think it was in 2004 when Japan was hit by a tsunami. Suppose at that time Japan was destroyed, what would have happened to the economy of South Africa, since South Africa has its own universities and is yet to produce its own car. In fact, South Africa did produce a car called Joule, which was supposed to be an electric car. But because of international pressure and companies like OPEC, which manufacture fuel, or in this case, yes, fuel, most countries are not allowed to produce their own cars, which may run on alternative fuels, because the likes of OPEC will run out of business. And so we live in this false notion of democracy, which is nothing more than an imperialism, because democracy was invented by the Greeks and has always and only been used as a means to expand the Western influence and imperialism. For instance, every country that becomes a democracy is allowed to join the UN and somehow must borrow money from the United Nations, the IMF, and the World Bank, which they must pay with debt. So in symbol, democracy simply represents imperialism, because all these countries are the same. They follow the same laws which are compiled in Europe or in the Western world, and are supposed to comply to the needs of the Westerners, so that whenever Westerners go, they may feel comfortable, because their laws will be applicable even there. And so we have sports where the average person has played a certain sport, but we're obsessed with these sports. That's the main problem that I would like to point at. And we take this obsession from sports into politics, and we make a false impression that we do understand politics. And the average person only understands politics from what they see on TV, in other words, from news. They hardly know their country's history as to why this democracy or this political system which we are employing was adopted, and they hardly do any research concerning those things. And they pretend to be matured or intelligent by following politics, forgetting the fact that, unlike sports, politics have a way of implicating our futures as well as our lives. For instance, every time you go and vote, you are actually approving the system, saying that I approve of what has happened for the past 5 years, and I'm now employing politicians for the next 5 years to decide on my life. And so you have a situation where you have adults who want to be governed or ruled, similar to kids who need parenting from adults. And so in this case, you have parents in the form of adults who want to be parented by other adults. Strange enough. But this is the kind of world that we live in, full of ignorance, where people fool themselves into thinking that they understand the institutions they follow, such as education, religion, as well as politics. But the most dangerous part of all this is that with politics as well as religion, you invest with your soul, because you have to pay um, full attention to these institutions by submitting your lives into them. Whenever you elect a president or a political party to rule, you are deciding on what future we may have under those political conditions. Even though such political organization has never ruled before or has never ruled in those, let's say for instance, South Africa currently we're dealing with COVID-19. And Ramaphosa is the president. Ramaphosa has never ruled a country dealing with COVID-19. And Ramaphosa was never elected to deal with a pandemic. And so we don't need pandemics. Instead, we need development. This is why we have governments. As a matter of fact, the idea of individuals ruling over the majority is new. This is why in the Bible, everything wrong is depicted as Egypt. Actually, Egypt is replaced by Babylon, which is a terminology used to describe evil. So in this case, Egypt had pharaohs, and the pharaohs were there to replace the 24 elders, 144 chiefs, and 144,000 judges, which was the community rule, a divine form of governance. And so each and every one of these countries today have adopted the Egyptian system, and the Greeks themselves learn a lot from Egypt. So this is why individual rule is always the problem. But we have numbers of educated people who think they know what they are doing, such as journalists who are there to report on what politicians are doing. And they arrogantly showcase what is happening, or they arrogantly represent politicians without knowing any alternative form of governance which might be better than the current one, or the capitalist system, which favors a few individuals who must rule above a majority. And this majority must be made ignorant so that they do not participate in the economic affairs of their own country. For instance, in South Africa, the average black person has no participation in mining, forestry, fishing, and many other industries. In fact, the average black person participates in as much as 5% of all the industries there are in this world. We are yet to produce cars, technologies. Almost everything we use was produced by others for us, using our own minerals. And because of this, Africa will always be poor. Africa will always have pandemics as well as civil wars, because what's beneath our feet is more valuable than what's in our minds. Thing is, we don't value our own intelligence. We don't learn, we don't study, we don't educate ourselves, we don't create our own education systems. And so every educated black person is eventually transformed into a mini white person, or in other words, they are initiated into Western thinking. Thus, this creates confusion, as well as they become representatives of the Western system against their own people. And this is why Africa will never develop, because Africa has valuable resources but an ignorant population, which subscribes to a Western system which was designed to convert their thinking as well as their allegiance to their own people. And so the ignorance here is based on our following of religion, schools, as well as politics, which hardly serve us and were presented to us in order to pacify our thinking and make us compliant to the Western system. And in return, this renders us poor as well as marginalized. And each and every time we have these political